Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Imagine this. The reason one prostate cancer treatment works better than another isn't really about broad categories like racial background, but it's actually about the unique genetic fingerprint of your specific tumor.
Right.
Today, we're diving into some really fascinating new research that brings this kind of personalized approach much closer to reality. We're looking at a really large-scale study analyzing the genetic makeup of prostate cancer in thousands of United States veterans.
Yeah, it's a significant piece of work. And for this exploration, we're drawing on, well, first, a detailed health news report that highlighted the key findings, but also importantly, the original peer-reviewed scientific paper itself.
Okay.
That was published in JAMA Network Open, and it gives us all the in-depth details, how they did it, what they found.
Got it. So our goal today really is to understand the key genetic variations that this study found when comparing non-Hispanic Black and non-Hispanic white veterans with advanced prostate cancer.
Right, and also what these differences might actually mean for treatment.
Exactly. How we approach treating this disease, and maybe most importantly, why this kind of research is so vital for making sure cancer care is, well, truly equitable for everyone.
Yeah.
So let's start with the study itself. What were the researchers really trying to achieve here?
Well, the main goal was to basically describe and compare how often specific genetic changes occur. Changes in genes and biological pathways that we already know are important in prostate cancer.
Okay.
And they specifically focused on comparing these between a really large group of non-Hispanic Black and non-Hispanic white United States veterans.
Yeah.
All of whom had metastatic prostate cancer, so the cancer had spread.
Right, advanced stage.
Advanced stage, yeah.
Yeah.
And they also wanted to see if these genetic changes were linked to a veteran's reported race, or interestingly, how long they lived within the Veterans Affairs healthcare system.
Okay, and how did they actually do this research? I mean, that sounds like a huge project.
Oh, it absolutely was. Significant undertaking. It was what we call a retrospective study. So they looked back at data that was already collected.
Right.
They analyzed data from over 5,000, think about that, 5,000 U.S. veterans with metastatic prostate cancer who had undergone this really sophisticated genetic analysis called next-generation sequencing.
Wow.
And this testing was done between 2019 and 2023. It's part of the Veterans Affairs National Precision Oncology Program.
So they had access to just this vast amount of data. How did they then compare the genetic info between the two groups?
Exactly. So they specifically compared how often these alterations, these genetic changes, appeared in 1,784 non-Hispanic Black veterans and 3,231 non-Hispanic white veterans.
Okay.
And crucially, to make sure the comparison was fair, they used statistical methods to adjust for other factors, things that could influence the results.
Like what sort of factors?
Things like it was the sample from tissue or blood plasma, how old were the veterans, what were the specifics of their cancers, any military exposures, even things like the socioeconomic conditions of their neighborhoods and other health conditions they had. They tried to account for a lot.
That is a lot to consider. So what were they looking for specifically within those genetic profiles?
So they analyzed how often changes occurred in individual genes known to be involved in prostate cancer. They also looked for what are called actionable targets.
Actionable targets, meaning?
Meaning specific genetic alterations where there might already be a treatment available, like a targeted drug or maybe an immunotherapy.
Oh, okay. Makes sense.
And finally, they looked at key biological pathways. Think of them like networks involved in prostate cancer. So the androgen receptor signaling pathway, that's a big one for prostate cancer growth, and also pathways involved in repairing damaged deoxyribonucleic acid, or DNA.
Okay, after all that incredibly detailed analysis, what were the really important things they discovered? What were the main takeaways?
Well, several key findings emerged. Firstly, even though the top 10 most commonly altered genes were actually the same in both groups.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, but the frequency, how often these alterations occurred in several of those genes, and in some key biological pathways, well, that differed significantly between the two groups.
So it's a subtle but important difference. Not what genes, but how often they were changed.
Precisely. It's about the frequency.
Were there particular genetic alterations that were, say, more common in one group versus the other?
Yes, absolutely. The study found that non-Hispanic Black veterans had a significantly higher likelihood, higher odds of having genomic alterations known to be linked with a better response to immunotherapy.
Okay, immunotherapy. That's a big area right now.
It is. And this included things like high microsatellite instability, that's a measure of genetic changes in the tumor that can predict immunotherapy response, and also alterations in a specific gene called SPOP.
So what does that suggest then?
Well, it suggests that immunotherapy, harnessing the body's own immune system, might be particularly effective for certain non-Hispanic Black veterans with this type of cancer.
Interesting. And what about the non-Hispanic white veterans? Were there alterations more common in that group?
Yes, there were. The non-Hispanic white veterans showed higher odds of alterations in several other important areas. This included the AKTPI3K pathway involved in cell growth, the androgen receptor axis, which we mentioned is key for prostate cancer.
Right, the hormonal link.
Exactly. Also, genes involved in repairing damaged DNA, and tumor suppressor genes, which normally act like brakes on cancer development.
Could you maybe give us a bit more detail on some of those specific gene differences? You mentioned SPOP earlier.
Sure. So at the individual gene level, SPOP alterations, more frequent in non-Hispanic Black veterans. Conversely, alterations in a gene called TMPRSS2, that one's linked to the androgen receptor signaling, were less frequent in non-Hispanic Black veterans.
Okay.
Similarly, alterations in the big tumor suppressor genes, TP53 and PTN, also less frequent in the non-Hispanic Black group. There was also an initial finding about another gene, CDK12, which is linked to immunotherapy targets in maybe more aggressive cancer. It looked more frequent initially in non-Hispanic Black veterans, but that difference wasn't statistically significant after they adjusted for all those other factors we talked about.
Right. The adjustment is key. So we're definitely seeing some distinct biological differences in the tumors between these groups. Did these genetic variations track with how long the veterans lived? Did it affect survival?
Yeah, that's a critical question. So they found that alterations in tumor suppressor genes, specifically TP53, were associated with shorter overall survival. And that was true for both groups, non-Hispanic Black and non-Hispanic white veterans.
Okay, so that gene is bad news regardless.
Pretty much. But, and this is really one of the most significant findings, despite these biological differences they saw in the tumors, the overall survival rates were actually similar between the two groups.
Really? Similar survival despite different tumor genetics.
Yes, within the context of the Veterans Affairs healthcare system, which generally provides equal access to care for these veterans.
Wow, that is a powerful point.
It really is. It suggests that access to quality healthcare might be playing a huge role in outcomes, maybe even kind of leveling the playing field despite underlying biological differences.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, one last thing about the study method. Did they find that the type of sample mattered? Tissue versus blood?
Yes, they did note that. They observed that whether the sequencing was done on a tissue sample, like from a biopsy, or a blood plasma sample, sometimes called a liquid biopsy, and also whether the tissue came from the original tumor or a place where it spread, well, that could affect whether certain alterations were detected.
So that's something doctors need to keep in mind when interpreting results.
Exactly. It adds another layer to consider.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good handle on what the study found. Now let's really dig into what these findings mean, like in the bigger picture. What are the main implications here?
I think the findings really strongly support this whole idea of precision oncology. Tailoring treatment based on the specific genetics of a patient's tumor.
Right. Personalized medicine.
Exactly. It looks like it could be a really vital tool for achieving more equitable cancer care.
Yeah.
By using this genomic testing to guide treatment choices, doctors can potentially pick therapies based on the tumor's actual biology, not relying on something less precise like race.
Yeah.
And Dr. Kashiyamoa from Moffitt Cancer Center, who is a senior author on the study, really emphasized this. He said precision oncology and genomic testing are powerful tools for equitable care, guiding therapy based on biology, not race.
That really drives home the shift, doesn't it, towards personalization?
Yeah.
So, okay, the finding that non-Hispanic Black veterans had more of those immunotherapy-related alterations, what does that specifically tell us?
Well, it suggests that potentially a larger proportion of non-Hispanic Black veterans with metastatic prostate cancer might actually stand to benefit from immunotherapy treatments. The higher frequency of things like high microsatellite instability in their tumors could make those tumors more visible or susceptible to the immune system, especially when boosted by immunotherapy drugs. So it points towards a real opportunity potentially to improve outcomes for this group with those therapies.
And flipping that, what about the lower frequency of the androgen receptor signaling alterations in non-Hispanic Black veterans? How might that play out in treatment?
Yeah, that's also a really critical point to consider because so many standard prostate cancer treatments, especially the hormonal therapies, target that exact pathway.
Right.
A lower frequency of alterations there could mean, potentially, that non-Hispanic Black veterans might not respond quite as well to those standard hormonal treatments compared to patients who do have those alterations more frequently.
So it pushes for considering other approaches.
Exactly. It highlights why we need to think about alternative or additional treatment strategies that might be especially beneficial for this subgroup. And Dr. Isla Garraway from UCLA Health, another senior author, made a similar point that we need to prioritize access to these genomic tools to move beyond historical disparities and really improve treatment for everyone.
It definitely sounds like this research is pushing us hard to move beyond race as the main factor when deciding on treatments.
I think that's absolutely right. And the researchers were explicit about this. They concluded they did not find any biomarker, any genetic alteration that should be excluded from testing, just based on a patient's race.
That seems crucial.
It is. The focus really needs to be on the individual tumor's unique profile. And another important aspect is just the diversity of the study itself, having 36% non-Hispanic Black veterans included.
That's a high percentage for this kind of research, isn't it?
It is, and it's really crucial. We absolutely need this kind of inclusive representation in precision oncology research and in clinical trials to make sure the findings are actually relevant and applicable to all the different populations affected by the disease.
Yeah.
And Dr. Cara Maxwell at the University of Pennsylvania, also a co-senior author, kind of summed it up by saying that removing barriers to care and applying precision medicine equitably can lead to better outcomes for all patients.
Makes perfect sense. Now, with any big study like this, there are always limitations, right?
Sure.
Things to keep in mind. What are some of the caveats here?
Definitely. And the researchers were upfront about them. One important one is the lack of matched germline data.
Germline data, what's that exactly?
So that's the genetic information you're born with, your inherited genes, as opposed to the somatic mutations that develop just within the tumor itself.
Okay.
Without that matched germline info, it can be a bit harder to interpret results from blood plasma samples sometimes, because an alteration found in the blood might be related to an inherited condition, not necessarily just the tumor.
I see. That could complicate the picture. Any other methodological limits?
Yes, a couple more. They analyzed the first tumor sample that was sequenced for each patient. Now, for a few patients who might have had multiple tests over time, looking only at the first one might not capture the whole story of how the cancer's genetics changed, maybe in response to treatment.
Right, cancers can evolve.
They absolutely can. And also, there's the potential for something called survivorship bias.
Survivorship bias.
Yeah, basically, patients who had really aggressive cancer and maybe died quickly after diagnosis might be underrepresented. They might not have lived long enough to even get the next generation sequencing done within that study period. So you might miss some of the most aggressive cases.
Okay, that's important context. And how widely can we apply these findings? You mentioned these were all U.S. veterans in the VA system.
That's another key point, yes. This specific group, U.S. veterans getting care within the Veterans Affairs system, is distinct. They have unique characteristics, maybe different exposures, different patterns of healthcare access compared to the general population.
So we can't just assume these exact percentages apply to everyone in the U.S.
Exactly. We need to be cautious about generalizing too broadly.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, they also noted that plasma tests, while convenient, might be a bit less sensitive for finding certain immunotherapy targets and maybe could overreport some DNA repair alterations because of things floating in the blood that aren't tumor-related.
Okay, lots to consider there. But overall, this has been a really, really valuable deep dive into this important research. To kind of wrap things up, what would you say is the single most important takeaway message for people listening?
I think the biggest takeaway is just the growing and really compelling evidence for personalized medicine in cancer. This study strongly supports the idea that focusing on the unique genetics of an individual's tumor, rather than relying on these broad categories like race, holds just tremendous promise. Promise for delivering more effective treatments, and importantly, more equitable treatments for metastatic prostate cancer.
So the future is really about the individual's tumor biology.
It seems that way. And it means ensuring widespread access to comprehensive genomic testing is absolutely crucial if we want to realize that potential for everybody, regardless of their background.
And maybe a final thought to leave our listeners chewing on.
Yeah, maybe just consider what it really means for the future of cancer treatment when we truly shift our focus to the specific biology of each tumor. How can we as a society really work to make sure that all individuals from every single background have equal access to these powerful diagnostic tools, tools that could lead to better outcomes and hopefully finally start to eliminate some of those long-standing disparities we see in cancer care?
A really important question to ponder.
Definitely. Maybe, listeners could explore resources from organizations focused on precision oncology or prostate cancer research to learn more about this rapidly changing field.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.